For over 2,000 years, physicians didn't see the body as a machine. They saw it as a microcosm of the universe. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm weren't just bodily fluids, they were the manifestations of elemental forces, linked to the seasons, the stars, the psyche, and the soul. Today we call this superstition. But what if it wasn't? What if it was simply seeing through a different lens? What if it was a lost logic or language of the body? This series is an herbalist take on humoral theory. Not to romanticize it, but to understand it. And in understanding it, maybe appreciate a little of what was lost. Humoral theory gets a bad rap. It's often portrayed as superstitious, dangerous, illogical, and unfounded. The vestiges of a pre-modern, pre-civilized, and ultimately backwards people. But was it? I have some doubts. To be fair, the bloodletting craze of the Renaissance for just about everything wasn't a great idea, and is in no small part where we get our modern judgments of pre-modern medicine. But was this really all there was to it? Is 2,500 years of history summed up in the plague doctor applying leeches, or the Victorian doctor draining his patient of blood hoping to shock the body into a healing response? And if that was all it was, how could it have lasted? The picture we get of humoral theory is from the medical historian, and there is plenty of excellent information out there. But with all chronicles of the past, we should keep in mind that history is written by the victors, and the medical history chronicles a war of ideas, of competing natural sciences and social philosophies. Those victorious have a vested interest, whether recognized or not, in building the narrative of the supremacy of the worldview that won out. People and societies need coherence. But we should keep in mind those sciences and philosophies that change for coherence may see some things better, but other things worse than what came before. You gain a little of this, and you lose a little of that. Progress is not linear. Any new understanding sacrifices particular truths of older models for the sake of the new, regardless of whether those older truths were valid or not. And you don't know for generations whether a new theory is better or not. In fact, you don't even know what treatment in a new theory looks like. All of this historical information is out there, but I want to take a different perspective. Like I said, I'm an herbalist. Why an herbalist take might be interesting or add to the discussion is because herbalism was one of the main treatment methods used in humoral theory. And a lot of the negative views of humoral theory, crazy stories of bloodletting aside, come from people who are not actually healthcare practitioners. Not Western medical doctors, not herbalists, and certainly not people who trained in humoral medicine. They come from people who have oftentimes no background in medicine at all, have never sat and listened to a patient, have never been in the position of needing to figure a case out, have never seen firsthand the effects of a given treatment, allopathic or alternative, and have not seen a patient get better or worse and needed to figure out why. So one can be forgiven for wondering, are they the best people to judge? Or perhaps the past failures are so glaringly obvious that no one in their right mind could possibly excuse them or pretend otherwise. In the end, it's up to the individual to judge, and our opinions change with new data all the time. As I said, I'm an herbalist, but I'm not a Western herbalist. My training is in classical East Asian herbalism. I have not trained in Galenic humoral theory, because pretty much nobody has. Outside of India, Pakistan, Iran, it's been dead for 200 years. The scientific revolution killed it, and the pharmaceutical industry buried the body. So I'm standing outside this system too, not as a scholar, not as a Western physician, not as a historian. These are my biases, these are my limitations. So maybe my perspective gets some things right, and maybe it gets some things wrong. I'm sure you'll tell me. but hopefully it's at least interesting. This is the first video in a long series before getting into looking at actual materia medicas, antidotarium, and whatever old texts we can get our hands on. So if deep dives into medical antiquity and exploring the intersection of metaphysical and physical systems are of interest to you, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. There is a lot to talk about. So what is humoral theory and where does it come from? Before we can talk about humoral medicine from an herbal perspective, we have to talk about what it is in general, which means the history and, importantly, the philosophical and cultural context. We need to talk about what people thought and why. The medical historian Paul Unschild, in a talk in 2007, said the following: "In all civilizations, healthcare is a heterogeneous expression of culture. There is always a coexistence of medical and non-medical healthcare. And this is important. There has always been the established medical system and then the non-medical folk treatments, both of which together constitute healthcare. But why did people become dissatisfied with the treatment failures at a specific point in time and not another? Why is there change in belief in the gods to the belief in the four elements, the science of humoral theory, pathology in ancient Greece?" He goes on, "Do you think it's clinical results? Never. Not a single basic change in medicine in 2,500 years. Not a single basic change, not a single new theory was based on new clinical results. It's always the other way around. A new theory comes first, and then it's clinically applied. And then hopefully it's better." So this implies that progress is not necessarily built upon itself, but change happens as a consequence of something else. Advancement, achievement, and progress are not linear, especially in the field of medicine, and we are not so smart or rational as to be motivated solely or even primarily by what works. There has to be a driver to change, and that driver is worldview. One's understanding of the nature of reality in the universe and how one fits into it. Worldview dictates everything. Worldview drives theory, including social, natural, and medical theories. Whether these theories are right and that they produce better results is secondary to the need for cohesion of our world of ideas and the world of physical reality, of the macro and the micro, the world above and the world below, the world without and the world within. This mirroring of as above, so below is a need for honesty that we can't get away from, expressed in such sayings as, "The truth shall set you free." The truth here being the reconciliation of discord between the inner and the outer. So to sum up our worldview, our underlying assumptions and values we believe to be true condition how we interpret information. Medicine doesn't just reflect what we know. It reflects what we believe can be known. So if a system like humoral theory ruled for 2,000 years, we have to ask not just why it ended, but what replaced it, and what that replacement tells us about ourselves, and tells us about our biases. Humoral theory, specifically Hellenistic or Galenic humoral theory, was the dominant paradigm in Europe from the classical Greek period of 500 BCE to the early 1800s. It was a literate and scholarly tradition taught in universities and practiced by trained physicians, as opposed to the folk medicine of village healers, sometimes referred to as wise woman medicine, which was often not recorded at all. Originating in ancient Greece, humoral theory spread throughout Europe and the Middle East and into regions of Africa and India. Then, in the 1800s, it fell out of favor. While its decline was not instantaneous, given its long history and tradition and its vast geographic spread, one might rightly wonder what happened. The common narrative is that modern medicine, grounded in a more objective truth, was simply vastly superior. And when it finally arrived on the scene, it showed how humoral theory, based on primitive metaphysical and superstitious beliefs simply didn't work. But if this is true, isn't that a little odd? After all, Europe's intellectual giants gave us Aristotelian logic, law, mathematics, Western philosophy, and the foundations of Western scientific and democratic thought. How could they have been so profoundly mistaken about health in the human body? Maybe they simply didn't have access to technology to image the hidden world around them, or anesthetics or anesthesia to open the body up. Maybe they couldn't know how wrong they were. Maybe. But in making such an argument, we have to recognize our modern bias of scientific materialism, which states that matter is the fundamental substance of reality, and that all phenomena, including mental states and consciousness, can be explained by or reduced to material interactions. This inherent bias says some information's real and some isn't, and it may tend to invalidate conclusions arrived at via correlation and deductive reasoning. So it's not so much an argument against efficacy as it is against acceptable theory and the thought processes of that theory. To explain this a little bit, let's look at what scientific materialism is. Scientific materialism, the merging of scientific rationalism and materialism, became dominant in European thinking in the 1600s and 1700s, with figures like Thomas Hobbes, Diderot, Julien Offray de la Mettrie, and it arguably reached its height in the 1880s with Ludwig Büchner, Ernst Haeckel, and Darwin. And here, we also see theories of scientific materialism finally spread from the natural sciences to the social sciences with Marx and Engels. And you can decide for yourself to what extent Marxism validates or invalidates the scientific materialist worldview. The worldview underlying much of ancient Greek medicine was not the same as the scientific materialism of the 17th to 19th centuries. Early Greek medical thought was grounded in a teleological natural philosophy. Phenomena and cosmic order were explained in terms of purpose, not solely mechanical cause. Form existed for the sake of function. Structure served an inherent end. The universe had an intrinsic order, and matter was organized according to this design. In its earliest medical expressions, the reasoning was correlative, linking qualities, seasons, elements, and humors, rather than the fully formal logic later developed by Aristotle and Galen. But even if the ancient Greeks believed in design and purpose as opposed to the chance arising and interacting of matter that the scientific materialists believe, ancient philosophical systems were not crude attempts at proto-science as modern bias may assume. Rather, they were grounded in rational insight and deductive reasoning, aiming to produce theories of reality that explained not only the physical world, but man's place within the cosmos, society, and moral order. Furthermore, their focus was not only on description or prediction, but on how to live well, to cultivate balance, virtue, and harmony. Scientific materialism, on the other hand, takes the perspective that function is only a consequence of form, a byproduct. There is no design to anything at all. Scientific materialism relies on inductive experimentation and mechanical causality. It often produces models that negate or trivialize personal agency, reducing human consciousness to a byproduct of organized matter and dismissing free will as illusory and all action and decision a result of cause and effect chemical states of the brain mediating stimulus and response. In doing so, it strips the human being of metaphysical significance and redefines life as a system to be decoded, optimized, or repaired, not understood in terms of purpose. Is it any wonder that modern society struggles for meaning, prizes material security and comfort over human connection, and struggles with such anxiety and depression? In short, our modern perspective is biased. It's like an accent. Everyone thinks it's always the other person who talks funny, never them. This might seem like a controversial statement, but humoral theory is medicine. Medicine is the attempt to understand and treat disease solely on the basis of science. This means a system that is rational and internally coherent. It doesn't matter that one might disagree with what that science is. It is still an attempt to explain and thus predict based upon reason and logic, as opposed to metaphysics, divine origin, or spirits and ancestors. So humoral medicine was most certainly medicine. Now, to be clear, when I say that humoral theory was medicine, I don't mean it has the same results, good or bad, as modern medicine. I mean that it was a rational, coherent system built on the best understanding of the world available at the time. Humoral medicine reflected a world that saw the human being as a microcosm of the cosmos, governed by balance, harmony, and the interplay of elemental forces. Modern biomedicine reflects a world of mechanism, data, and control. It views the body as a biochemical machine, disease as malfunction, and treatment as repair. But again, the modern worldview, like any other, is not neutral. It rests on philosophical assumptions that only what is measurable is real, that matter gives rise to mind, that causality is mechanical. So the question isn't, was humoral theory scientific like ours? The question is, what does our idea of scientific even mean, and who gets to define it? What counts as evidence? What counts as healing? These aren't just technical questions, they're cultural, they're metaphysical, and they change across time. But where did the idea that the human body must mirror the cosmos come from? Theories about human existence, whether in medicine, politics, or religion, don't arise in a vacuum. Not to belabor the point, but there is a common principle. The conceived structure of the universe, inferred through observations of the natural world, mirrors the structure of society and vice versa. Again, people need coherence between the inner and outer world. People are designed to see patterns and make meaning. Cognitive dissonance, when our environment doesn't match our worldview, is a threat because it means the world is unpredictable. So naturally, we unconsciously build systems that mirror universal principles between the cosmos, society, and the self. Influential thinkers from the ancient Greeks to the Renaissance stated this explicitly over and over again. Plato, around 400 BCE, in Timaeus said, "He, the demiurge, constructed the soul of the world before the body and blended it out of the same elements, harmonizing the whole." The later Hermetics in the 2nd to 8th century would say, "Quod est inferius est quod sicut quod est superius, et quod est superius est sicut quod est inferius, ad perpetranda miracula rei unius." That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. Paracelsus, an alchemist and the father of toxicology, who incidentally rejected humoralism, said in his Paragramm in 1565, "Der Mensch ist das Ebenbild der Welt, und was in der großen Welt ist, ist auch in dem kleinen Menschen." Man is the image of the world, and what is in the great world is also in the small man. And from the Astronomia Magna, "Der Mensch ist aus allen Gestirnen genommen und ist ein Kompendium oder Extractus der ganzen Himmel." Man is taken from all the stars and is a compendium or extract of the entire heavens. This deeply internalized, perhaps even often unrecognized need for internal and external coherence is why political legitimacy was so often tied to natural order. And today we might recognize that political legitimacy is tied to economic order. And we might also recognize that both center around resources and constraint. The Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven is one example. If floods, famine, or disease plagued the land, it was a sign the ruling dynasty had lost cosmic favor. Similar ideas existed in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and elsewhere. And in such frameworks, the body was not merely an object of study. It was the expression of cosmic and political order, an internal mirror of the external world. The body, as expression of universal principle, in many ways, could be said to legitimize the mirrored social principle. This happened sometimes overtly, for example, as part of state ideology in ancient China, where the five-phase, otherwise known as five-element system, was designed specifically to mirror the reunification of the five warring states into a single Han dynasty empire. Each organ corresponded not only to a season, emotion, aspect of psyche, a spirit, a flavor, a direction, color, sound, etc., but also to a ministerial function of government, creating a model of the human being as a microcosm of the Confucian state. Health, then, was the balance and cooperation of these internal ministries. If the body was so envisioned, then the legitimacy of the state that mirrored it must also be true, even if it was the model of the state that came first. Greek medicine followed a similar pattern, although not as intentional. The body was understood as a polis, a city-state. Just as a functioning city required harmony between its social classes and institutions, so too the body required harmony between its internal parts, organs, faculties, and humors. Health was the internal counterpart to civic harmony. Disease was internal discord. Plato's Republic makes this explicit, mapping the soul's faculties of reason, spirit, and appetite onto the social classes of rulers, warriors, and producers. Similarly, each humor had its own temperament, virtues, and dangers. Ideal health wasn't achieved by eliminating a humor, but by balancing them, reflecting the Greek ideal of moderation and the mixed constitution outlined by Aristotle, where monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy were held in tension. Galen, whose name gives us Galenic humoral medicine, took this even further. He explicitly likened the physician to a philosopher-statesman, a ruler maintaining internal harmony. His medical writing is full of moral instruction, encouraging temperance, discipline, and rationality. Roman virtues. His anatomy mapped function to status. The brain ruled, the liver nourished, the heart animated. The body reinforced Roman ideals of hierarchy and duty. Galen was influenced by Stoic and Platonic cosmology, in which the universe is rational and ordered. The body, therefore, must be rational and ordered as well. Now that we understand the shape of the system, we need to understand its parts. Where do the humors come from? What are they made of? Humoral theory derives from early Greek natural philosophy, which aimed to describe phenomena through recurring patterns and qualities, grouping them into categories of like attributes, which would be called elements. The philosopher Empedocles was the first to propose a unified theory of four root rhizomata elements: earth, water, fire, and air. These roots combined and separated under the influence of two cosmic forces: love, philia, and nekos, strife. In other words, attraction and repulsion. This was the first pluralistic model of nature in the Western world, where multiple basic substances interact dynamically. In this model, we see love and strife holding together or opposing elements in precarious balance, in much the same way a society is held together, again as in Aristotle's mixed constitution, or polity. And indeed, Aristotle's social theory was, in fact, influenced by this very theory of cosmology. So it does not surprise that a theory that has utility in both explaining the ordering of the natural world and social structure is applied to an understanding of the organization of the human body as well. The four elements are air, water, fire, and earth. However, element did not mean the same thing as it does in modern science. The modern scientific description of the nature of the elements is that the elements are fundamental substances made of atoms, defined by number of protons, with electrons determining attraction, repulsion, and the ability to combine. Modern scientific thinking is literal, quantitative, and material. Modern chemistry's purpose is describing the elements is to label atomic structures for predictive and experimental accuracy. Its goal is empirical investigation into and manipulation of material substances. We cannot apply the same understanding of the modern elements to the classical Greek elements. While Empedocles did view the elements as physically real, other thinkers did not. Plato, in his Timaeus, did not describe the elements as having a physically solid nature, but a geometric nature. They were a kind of mathematically perfect archetype, an ideal form of which physical reality was an iteration. Aristotle did not even see the elements as geometrically or mathematically solid at all, but rather as states, tendencies, or modes of being. In general, the classical Greek nature of the elements were as archetypal principles that corresponded to qualities in matter and were conceived of as such to provide a philosophical and metaphysical understanding of the cosmos and human nature. We can understand these differences in ancient Greek and modern thought through differences in epistemology, which is the study of how we know what we know, where ancient Greek is based on deductive reasoning, observation, and analogy, while modern scientific thought is based on inductive reasoning, experimentation, and measurability. Thus, validation in Greek philosophy is based on philosophical coherence between the natural world and the human body and behavior. Validation in the modern scientific is based upon reproducible results and mathematical modeling. So we should understand the Greek elements not as literal things, but as a system of qualification and classification of phenomena which explain attraction, repulsion, change, and transformation. Importantly, this naturally creates a system that is correlative and inclusive, as opposed to modern thinking, which tends to be exclusive. One allows the user to pan out and see patterns. The other allows the user to pan in and see fine, pixel-perfect detail. They both have their uses, and those uses are context-dependent. What makes either system better or worse is the context it is used in. Regarding the correlative nature of the Greek elements, we see the qualities of the elements as earth being cold and dry, water being cold and wet, air being hot and wet, and fire being hot and dry. According to Empedocles, everything in the world is a mixture of differing proportions of air, water, earth, and fire. These singular forms of differing proportions create affinity and repulsion to other forms with their own differing proportions of elements. And because forms themselves are composed of differing proportions of these elements, which in turn have their own attractions and repulsions, the physical form of anything or any creature is always in a state of precarious balance, with external environmental influences or internal mental emotional influences always threatening to tip the scales and turn a situation of delicate harmony into one of disharmony. This was a tremendous change in worldview, because it created a rational cosmology, and it was the foundation of medicine, because as natural philosophy influenced conceptions of the human body, those conceptions became suddenly rational. The world and man did not depend upon divine origin or intervention, but was described by observation and logic. This was a marked departure from prior thinking, which posited a supernatural origin to human health and disease, and meant that health no longer depended upon placating or appealing to ghosts, ancestors, demons, or nature spirits. Aristotle, building upon Empedocles' four elements, created a logical explanation of how these four elements could transform into one another based on shared or opposing qualities. This is how fire became hot and dry, air became hot and wet, water became cold and wet, and earth became cold and dry. Aristotle's theories of change explained how an element could transmute to another element by changing only one of its qualities at a time. For example, if fire is hot and dry and air is hot and wet, fire can change to air by becoming wet, as both are still hot. Here we see an attraction and balance of opposites and transformation of elements. But what does this have to do with the humors? Aristotle's contribution to the theory of the humors, and by extension to humoral theory, was to define them not merely by what things are made of, but how they behave and transform. For him, the elements were characterized by combinations of qualities, hot, cold, wet, dry, making it possible to view nature not as composed of static substances, but as a dynamic system of interactions. This qualitative model enabled later thinkers to abstract and generalize across domains, linking medical theory with psychological types, seasonal rhythms, food, lifestyle, and more. These correlations formed a holistic system in which each element came to be associated with a humor, a temperament, a season, a life stage, and a planetary influence. Earth, cold and dry, corresponded with black bile and melancholy. Water, cold and wet, with phlegm and winter. Air, hot and wet, with blood and spring. Fire, hot and dry, with yellow bile and summer. These associations followed a logic of qualities, not arbitrary, but rooted in a coherent framework of balance and transformation. And importantly, they're completely relatable. We all know what it's like to get melancholic in the fall, to get phlegmy and lethargic in the winter, to get cabin fever in the spring, and to have a touch of mania in the summer. The diseases and treatments of the humors are completely relatable too, but we'll get into that in the future. So the Hippocratic tradition emerging in the late 5th century BCE laid the groundwork for the humoral system. Aristotle provided the logic of change and balance, but it was Galen of Pergamon in the 2nd century CE who codified it into the elaborate structure that dominated medicine for centuries. He unified the elements, humors, temperaments, organs, diseases, and treatments into a single coherent model. But even though he codified it, it was not exactly a fixed system, and just as many Greek philosophers did not believe the elements were physical substances, many physicians didn't believe the humors were real substances either, but rather that they were the central concepts of a theory that organized the body and drugs, food, and lifestyle in a meaningful way, allowing one to describe archetypal health, individual health, disease, prognosis, and disease progression, medications, what makes a drug a medicine for one person and a poison for the other, what dosage makes it a medicine or a poison based on condition, for what conditions to use them, and when and how. Galen himself, in On the Elements According to Hippocrates, admits that humors are not directly visible in the way tissues and organs are, and much of humoral pathology is inferred from symptoms, not direct observation. Furthermore, even though Galen codified 4 humors linked to correlative categories of attributes, many physicians didn't agree on that exact number. For example, Herbalist thought there were 11. Many physicians in their own practices had their own ideas of what the humors were based on their own experience. Galen himself created subcategories of humors such as burnt humors, thick phlegm, and thin yellow bile. Thus we see that qualities defined by the paired opposites of hot, cold, and wet, dry are more important than the actual humors themselves, and that the humors are functional categories in theory and a shorthand for symptom clusters in practice. Indeed, scholars like Ose Temkin, Wimian Newton, and Heinrich von Staden have argued that Galenic medicine is better understood as a semiotic or symbolic system, a way of reading the body and its symptoms, than as a strictly materialist physiology. So we can see the humors were more than fluids, if you could even say they were fluids at all. They were both functional categories of correspondences and dynamic processes, visible expressions of elemental qualities. And the body was more than a machine. It was a microcosm of the universe and a reflection of the ideal state. Health was harmony, disease was imbalance, and the task of the physician was not just to treat the body, but to restore order. But for all of its theoretic sophistication, not everyone agreed. Even in its own time, humoralism certainly had its detractors. Humoral theory was the guiding theory of one camp of physicians, the dogmatists, but utterly rejected by others. The empirics thought the body was completely unknowable, and the best one could do was treat based on what worked in the past, regardless of why. It was also most definitely rejected by the Methodists, who rejected both anatomy and humoral theory, in favor of viewing the body as tense or lax tissue states. So there were a lot of competing schools of thought, and they seemed to center around the question, is function a product of form, or is form an expression of function, or are they co-arising, and to what extent can you know either? In these different schools, we see an attempt to make sense of reality and worldview shown in medical theory. Clearly, certain kinds of people would resonate with certain kinds of schools, and it's interesting to group these later schools according to Plato's original tripartite class structure from the Republic: the ruling class, the warrior class, and the artisan class. The dogmatists or Galenists believed in the full cosmology of humoral theory and specialized knowledge would resonate with the ruling class. The Methodists, rejecting humoral theory and anatomy for the sake of systematized disease classification and treatment, have a kind of bureaucratic, technical, and systematized approach that could be likened to the warrior class. And the empirics, doing the tried and true without overanalyzing, would be the artisans. These schools represent a world in flux, with changing and competing views. Nothing is codified yet. But the Galenic humoralists won out. Humoralism finally became the dominant medical theory in the 2nd century CE under Galen, who's physician to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Galen had the benefit of the institutional backing of imperial patronage. He also engaged in brutal rhetorical attacks on competing schools, wrote a massive body of writings, and performed a public spectacle in the form of demonstrations of anatomy. But it was more than that. Galen was the man of his time. His synthesizing and codifying of medicine matched imperial Rome's centralizing mood. Intellectual pluralism was exhausting, and Rome was standardizing law, education, and religion. Roman law unified disparate customs under a universal framework. Galen's medicine mirrored this. It integrated Hippocratic humoral theory, Aristotelian teleology, Stoic psychology, and Platonic ethics. It proposed a rational, hierarchical model of the body, with the brain as ruler, the heart as governor, and the organs as obedient citizens. It was cosmological. It argued that nature does nothing in vain. Everything has a purpose and place. It mirrored Rome's own self-image, the emperor at the top, the Senate and the governors as intermediaries, the citizens and provinces as functional organs of the whole. So once again, we see that theories of the body mirror theories of man's place in the cosmos and society. Galen was the right person at the right place at the right time to codify the model of the body to match the then current natural sciences, cosmology, and political order. Galen's view of the body was the microcosm of the Roman Empire. So what do you think? Was it foolishness or forgotten wisdom? Let me know in the comments. And if this kind of long-form exploration interests you, please like and subscribe. There's a lot more to come. Stay tuned for future videos where we talk about actual treatment methods and the movement of humoralism from Greece to the Middle East and finally to Europe throughout the ages.